Agriculture on the move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement. Good day, St. Lucia. Welcome to the program, Agriculture on the Move. My name is Philip Sidney, your host. Today with me in studio is Mr. Thomas Nelson, who is the Deputy Chief Fisheries Officer, and of course is attached to the Ministry of Agriculture. Welcome to the program, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah. Today it's a very interesting program because a lot of St. Lucians, their eyes are on what we call the sargassum seaweed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So tell us, let's go back a bit. I think that started coming in St. Lucia in 2011, you said?
Yes, 2011
yeah.
when
Okay.
it got the largest influx, or the first large influx.
Okay, so tell us, give us a little history, a little background, its origin.
Right. So sargassum is a floating seaweed that is known to be in an area in the Atlantic Ocean referred to as the Sargasso Sea. Mm-hmm. Actually, the sargassum got its name, from the Sargasso Sea or vice versa. Mm. But generally in the Atlantic region or in the area around Bermuda, you have a large body of water there, and this is the primary area where you get lots of sargassum growing and floating within that water system, because there are kind of a recirculating systems there that really allows for the sargassum to flourish. Now, occasionally, the current would change within that Atlantic Sea or within that area, and therefore the sargassum will leave that area and come across to the Caribbean region and the Northern and South American region as well. So this is the origin of sargassum. Of late, there have been reports of another source of sargassum, which is really in the northern Brazil shelf. So down near Brazil, Suriname, Guyana, in this area, there's been another source identified where sargassum is blooming. Sargassum is not new to the region, but certainly these large quantities started in 2011, where you have our beaches or our coastlines really getting inundated. Lots of sargassum basically washing ashore. Periodically, of course, because there are times when you would have large influxes and then you would have a lull in the amount that will come on shore. And there are varying levels of impact or challenges faced during those what we refer to as strandings of sargassum along the coast. Okay. Yes.
So I remember we were experiencing a lot of this on the east coast of St. Lucia. So much so in the Miku area, Prale,
yes.
Predominantly.
Right.
What was done during that time to assist? Because the fishers were having a lot of problems getting the boats out to sea. So what was done to ease the fishermen during that period?
Yeah, so as you rightly said, the east coast of the island, because of where sargassum is coming from and because of the ocean currents and the patterns, so the east coast is usually most affected by the influx or migration, so to speak, of sargassum mats. Generally, they would get trapped within closed areas, within bays. So therefore, when they get in there, it is very difficult for them to get out. So as you mentioned, Prale, Mikud, occasionally Savans Bay, but not very often. Kazaba, so you would appreciate the east coast, right, the coves. So they would get trapped there. Now these areas are areas where you either have communities, such as Prale and Mikud. You would also have hotels, for example, Kazaba. You also have the southeast coast where you have Coconut Bay because you have a hotel there. So therefore it the effects are felt more in these areas. What the ministry has done not only the ministry, but what government basically has been doing to alleviate the impact and the challenges being faced by those communities is really cleaning up once they have large strandings or large influx of sargassum within those areas. Now, you would appreciate in Prale, for example, this is a mangrove system, and it is very difficult to get machinery in there. In Micoud, you have a beach area there. In Savans Bay, sometimes when it comes in there, it's again another very sensitive marine ecosystem where you have mangroves. But this has generally been what has been done over the years, basically cleaning up once you get large volumes. I mean, there have been efforts in terms of the private sector or persons getting into agro-fertilizer or processing of the sargassum to create liquid fertilizer, but this has not really gotten to the extent to be able to create a dent when you have a large influx.
Yeah, I remember this guy, Mr. Dujon,
right?
Some years ago got into this, but I'm not hearing much of it again. So where is he at with that project? Yes,
Mr. Dujon, Joanne Dujon, he had actually gotten some support in collaboration with the Fisher Folk Organization and Jeff Small Grants, spearheaded by Giles Romulus, had actually provided some support to help with sargassum. But the issue, of course, is his capacity at the time to absorb the level of sargassum that would come in at any point in time. And therefore, he really did not have the capacity to process this large amount. And of course, it costs a lot because just the collection of the sargassum on a daily basis requires quite a bit of money and quite a bit of effort. And it really requires, greater private sector involvement, greater investment by the private sector, and also government, providing, whether it be the enabling environment, the necessary concessions, etc., for private sector to invest. So this has been the primary challenge. I am aware that he's still doing some level of processing, but not the extent to deal with the large volumes that we experience at this point in time.
I remember Barbados, they got a vessel that would go out there and actually catch it before it gets to shore. Because the problem you have is when it gets to shore and it starts to decompose, then the stench is very, 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 very high.
Yes.
Okay. Is there somewhere down the road where government is looking to invest in a vessel to ensure that we can handle this matter more efficiently?
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. The greatest value in terms of sargassum to be utilized and processed is before it actually gets to shore.
Exactly.
Because once it starts, or once it gets to shore, then it mixes with sand and other materials that may not be very useful. So therefore, you need to set up a system to remove it or to catch it basically, or to harvest it, offshore. And then you can do the processing. There's been, quite a bit of effort by other countries, including Barbados, in terms of doing that. There's been some effort in St. Lucia, but currently the government St. Lucia will be benefiting from a UNDP project that is funded by the government of Japan to provide some equipment and machinery. And in fact, we are in the process of, some of this equipment have actually arrived on island, the first phase or the first set of equipment, and we are in the process of clearing these pieces of equipment. As part of the project, there is going to be a vessel to help with offshore harvesting or harvesting of the sea moss out at sea. But we also will be getting some tractors, dump trucks, etc., to help with harvesting or dealing with those that would have come on the shore. Right, yes. In strategic areas, of course, and areas that are most affected by the influx. Yeah.
But this time around, and this thing came in large volumes, man, and more so on the West Coast.
Very good.
Which is very, very strange.
Yeah.
Again, as you mentioned, it's the phenomena of the tides are changing.
Yeah, actually what happens is generally, as I mentioned earlier, you would get the influx or the strandings on the East Coast. What would happen is occasionally you will get some stranding on the West Coast. And this is what created most of the alarm. Because there was basically change in current patterns, and therefore it caused the sargassum to come into areas or bays on the west coast of the island. Incidentally, in Soufrière, for example, Soufrière Bay generally has a very good flushing system, right? And I think it was for Soufrière Jazz that, basically, there was a large influx of sargassum. But within, I think, 2 days or the next day, quite a bit of that sargassum was able to get out of the bay because there is a very good flushing system. Of course, any bay along the west coast that is more sheltered and more protected and doesn't have that good flushing system, it tends to stay there a bit longer, and then you have the problem of decomposition and the gases being released.
Okay.
Yes.
But in the places like Pralin,
yes,
there's a community there.
Right.
What it gives off? It gives off carbon
hydrogen sulfide.
Yes,
right.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, if there is a high concentration of that in the community, do you think it can affect the humans? Because I know I have spoken to some people in there. The equipment, get rusted. So if that's doing some damage to the household equipment, far less the human body.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there have been reports. Of course, the ministry is not in a position because we are not, the experts in that area. We believe that, maybe the Ministry of Health would be in a better position to assess the situation in terms of the gases that are being released from the decomposition of the sargassum and its effect on people. But certainly there have been reports of, possible effects of increased levels of those gases on communities and people. Of course, there's also been reports of these gases affecting, household appliances and, other metals and other materials. I mean, I need to mention that there are challenges in terms of dealing with the sargassum. Of course, it can affect fishers' ability to go in and out of the bays. It can, result in downtime for them, because if you have large amounts of seaweed or the sargassum in the bays, the fishers will not be able to go in and out as easily. But there have been reports of, some benefits in that there was 1 year when we had a large influx of sargassum, and there were reports of increased catches of kawang. They had actually referred to it as chicken baklame. But as a ministry and as a department in particular, we want to put a word of caution out there, because at the end of the day, whereas there may be opportunity to catch fish under the sargassum mats, there is also the possibility of catching lots of juvenile fish, right? And the impact of catching juvenile fish can result or can lead to, lower catches down the road, right? So one example is, dolphin fish, dorado, right? Because the sargassum acts as a fish aggregating device, and a community of fish generally comes, around, fishers tend to catch whatever they get under the sargassum mats. And we have received advice, scientific advice, that dolphin fish in particular, dorado, we have to be careful not to catch dolphin fish that are less than 6 pounds weight.
Okay.
Right? And that would end up being approximately 2 feet long. So at the end of the day, in as much as it acts as an aggregating device, it provides an opportunity to catch fish that comes around. We also want to, let fishers know they have to be mindful of the size of fish that they catch from under the sargassum mats. In Barbados, for example, in fact, this year Barbados actually has put into law that dorado less than 6 pounds should not be harvested. Again, the dynamics is changing. We did not have these situations in terms of influx of sargassum and catching of, small fish. But because this is changing, it is important for fishers, fisherfolk, fisheries administrators to be mindful of the need to put in these conservation measures and to encourage fishers not to catch those small fish, out at sea, because in the long term we will have a serious problem.
Is there a collaboratory effort with the other islands? Because I noticed Barbados, all the islands are being affected.
Yeah.
Is there any collaboration in terms of sharing information as to what's happening? What are some measures to be taken? Because I know it's challenging. Yes. So I also know there was a meeting you all had here in concert with the other stakeholders.
Yes.
So give us some feedback.
Yeah. Actually, there's quite a bit of collaboration because the issue of sargassum is regional. Many of the countries are experiencing the same issue at the same time. And countries are really sharing knowledge, exchanging information. And in fact, the equipment and machinery project that I was referring to that's funded by the government of Japan through UNDP is actually a regional project. So St. Lucia will be benefiting from that, and some of the other countries within the region. So there's quite a bit of exchange, and so that we can try to bring resources together, bring experiences together, and sargassum is being discussed at a very, very high level, including at ministerial levels of organizations like the OECS and the CRFM, as well as, the CARICOM level. At the national level, it is also important for us to collaborate. And we recognize that, the issue of sargassum is not only a fisheries issue, but it's a national issue. And therefore, a number of other agencies would have to come on board. At one time, we had a task force to deal with sargassum, but because you have highs and lows in terms of the influx, therefore the work of the task force would be more critical when there would be the highs and less critical when there would be the lows. So because particularly of the influx or the strandings on the west coast, there's been now another call for agencies to collaborate and come together so that we can deal with sargassum at a national level. Because not only fishers, as I said, are being affected, but the general community. And as you mentioned earlier, they may have potential health issues or health implications being experienced. Yeah.
But moving forward, you mentioned equipment coming in, but then do you believe that climate change is playing a role in that regard?
Yeah, and I mean, it's an important question because how did we get here?
Exactly.
Sargassum has always been in the ocean, but now we're having more sargassum. The strandings or the influx or they are really more frequent, and this has been attributed to increased sea surface temperature that is really making the environment more conducive for the sargassum to grow. There's also been greater, because as I mentioned earlier, in the Sargasso Sea, generally the sargassum would have stayed within that region. Because you have changes in ocean dynamics, basically you're getting greater quantities breaking away more often. and therefore countries would be experiencing strandings along the coast much more, more frequently. The other issue, of course, is the issue of nutrients, right? It has been intimated that the ocean, we are basically dumping way more nutrients into the ocean, whether it be from fertilizer, whether it be from our households, whether it be from ships.
From ships, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And particularly the source that has been identified along the northern Brazil shelf, it's really been attributed to the southern rivers, the Orinoco River basically dumping way more nutrients into that ocean body, and therefore it enriches, it's basically like fertilizer for the sargassum, and therefore we are having these problems of strandings and sargassum influx more frequently.
So therefore we need to look at the source.
Yes, exactly.
We need to identify and have that sort of collaboration in terms of how they can limit the dumping of waste in the water.
Actually, in various fora, right, sargassum, we've been calling for sargassum to be treated similar to climate change. Right? That it should be given the kind of importance, the kind of funding, and the potential impact of sargassum, has not really been determined as yet, right? The impact on the environment, the impact on mangrove systems, the impact on fish stocks, the jury is still out in terms of the extent of that impact. And therefore it is important, similar to the issue of climate change, for, the international community to put the kind of importance and investment and money that is required to deal with sargassum. One of the things that we've always been saying is add value to sargassum. Right? It reminds me of the lionfish.
Yes.
Right? The lionfish was seen as, kind of a menace, etc. But and a great challenge. But when we started eating lionfish, basically, the lionfish got high priced, and persons really started targeting lionfish.
It's a delicacy now.
Exactly, and it's very expensive, and you cannot even get it. So at the end of the day, it is important for us to add value to sargassum, but that would require quite a bit of investment on the part of the private sector, as well as on the part of government. Now, the private sector sometimes is a bit very nervous, I would say, in respect of investment in sargassum, because there are uncertainties.
Yes.
Right? There may be 1 year, 2 years that you may not get any sargassum, and there may be 1 or 2 years that you'll get large quantities of sargassum. So if you put in quite a bit of investment, then what's about when there is downtime, or there is and this is investment that has really been put down, and you have to account. So it's really adding value to sargassum so that we can deal with it in a very comprehensive way.
But let's look at the mangroves.
Yes.
Where spawning of fish happens. Does it really affect that process? Well,
I mean, at the end of the day, that is what that I was saying, indicating earlier. When the sargassum gets into the mangrove system, it can basically start choking that mangrove system. You are basically, creating an environment where you do not have quite a bit of oxygen, right? Once the sargassum starts to decompose, it is basically, making the area void of oxygen.
Yeah, very toxic.
Exactly. And who knows, it may be releasing many other things that we are probably, many other pollutants or toxic substances that we are not necessarily aware of. There is still the issue of heavy metals in respect of sargassum, that quite a bit of research is still required. So at the end of the day, when it gets into the mangrove system, when it gets over coral reef habitats, as well as seagrass beds. It is really reducing, making the environment less conducive for survival of these species that are there, whether it be plant species or animal species.
Okay.
There are times when you would actually get dead fish on top of the sargassum.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, sometimes fish gets trapped, juvenile turtles get trapped. So it really creates an environment where, survival of some of these species, particularly in those bays and mangrove systems, can be very, very challenging and difficult.
I know there was a bit of challenge where some of the mangroves, the plants were dying.
Yes.
Is that a result of that toxic environment and that can cause the death of the mangrove?
Yeah. Well, there was not a direct correlation between the two of them, but it is highly likely. Because I said at the end of the day, the decomposition of sargassum really reduces the amount of oxygen that is available within the system. Okay. And there is need for quite a bit of research still. And that is why I said earlier, the true impact of sargassum, we've not really felt it. So that is why it is important for us, as a country, as well as a region, for private sector, government agencies, as well as civil society to come together so that we can add value to sargassum, invest in its management, and really get a handle of this very big issue.
As I want to close, where are we now? Can we say we are in a red zone now, or we are still in a zone that is manageable? So has it reached a critical point where we have to say, hey, we need to do a lot to ensure that does not happen?
No, I don't think that we have reached a point of crisis or point of red zone. But I don't think that we should get there before we act.
That's right.
When there was the noticeable influx on the West Coast, about a week, 2 weeks ago, it was all in the news. But now, it has taken a little bit of a back seat. But as a country and as stakeholders, it provides us with an opportunity to really, take stock and see how we can, when it arrives again, or if we were to have that situation, we would have a system in place. And that is why I indicated, we get in the equipment and machinery. We are really looking to engage the other stakeholders, the other ministries and other agencies, so that we can really formulate a very strategic plan to deal with instances of large influx of sargassum on the island.
Okay. Any final words, sir?
No, I mean, as I said earlier, it's really not a crisis stage. The Ministry of Agriculture, of course, is concerned about the fisher folk, right? The Department of Fisheries in particular, the stranding or influx of sargassum at the landing sites. We recognize that. We have been providing quite a bit of support so that fisher folk can manage. But we need to deal with sargassum at a much broader level, at a national level, and see that it does not remain a fisheries issue, but other stakeholders.
National and international.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for being here.
Pleasure.
I wish you success in handling the situation and to do not let it get to crisis situation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been watching Agriculture on the Move. We want to thank you for viewing the program. Of course, sargassum is here. We have to deal with this climate change, but we need to manage it. Thank you again for viewing. I'm Philip City saying goodbye and see you again. Thank you, my brother.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Agriculture on the Move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the Move.
Agricole en mouvement.
Agriculture on the Move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the Move.
Agricole en mouvement.